Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. In this episode, I feature Celeste Rapone, known for her narrative paintings that blur the boundaries between figuration and abstraction. At the core of her practice are formalist concerns such as surface, pattern, and color that shape the artist's inventive figures and scenes. She received her BFA from RISD and her MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she is an adjunct professor in painting and drawing. Celeste's work has been exhibited widely across the U.S. and abroad at Josh Lilley Gallery in London, Marianne Boesky Gallery in New York, Corbett versus Dempsey, Chicago, Robert's Project in L.A., Julius Caesar, Chicago, the Hyde Park Art Center, Chicago, Georgia Museum of Art, and the Institute of Contemporary Art, Boston. She was the 2018 recipient of a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant. Celeste's most recent solo exhibition, House Sounds, is currently on view at Josh Lilley Gallery in London, and her work will be included in the Bemis Center's upcoming exhibition, Presence in the Pause, Interiority and its Radical Immanence, opening May 20th of 23. Celeste lives and works in Chicago and is represented by Corbett versus Dempsey, the Marianne Boesky Gallery in New York, and Josh Lilley Gallery in London. Enjoy this episode featuring Celeste Rapone. Celeste, when did you discover your desire or your want to be an artist?
So I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I always loved to draw as a kid. And I also, loved putting together, and my mom would lay out very organized outfits for me, and I would always sort of destroy them and mix and match them. And so I think I always sort of had a specific way of wanting to express myself. And then I got more serious about my interests in high school. And that's when I decided I wanted to go to art school. And I was really lucky to have parents who were totally supportive of me wanting to go to art school, even though they knew nothing about that space. My mother was a nurse, my father was a lawyer, but I think they always sort of trusted that I would just figure it out. And so I went to RISD, and I think I would say around that time, my mom especially really was amazing and instrumental in me sort of navigating how to, I would get invited to do juried exhibitions, or I would have to ship paintings to little shows here and there. And she would sort of help me navigate all of that. And if I expressed an interest, I heard about this museum, I'd heard about the Dia Beacon. She was like, all right, let's go. And I think even now to this day, when she comes to Chicago, I'll drag her. We just saw the Nick Cave show at the MCA, or if I'm visiting them in New Jersey, I'll be like, okay, we got to go see the Alice Neal show. And she, even though she's not sort of in the art world at all or in that space, she's always really just excited to learn more about it. So she's been a great person that has sort of continued this interest with me on this journey. And, my parents have been really great about never sort of discouraging me from being an artist or going to grad school for painting. I think they always just thought I'd figure it out.
How did your art professors impact you?
I had great teachers along the way. I think at RISD, it was more skill building. I was an illustration major there. So I learned how to paint at RISD, and I never oil painted before. And I sort of fell in love with it there and haven't really looked back. And, I had one teacher in particular there who would always tell me that I need to get out of an illustration program and just paint. And I never knew what that meant. That was such an overwhelming and confusing thought to me, because that was all I knew. With illustration is just problem solving, not just, but that's a huge component of it, and he told me it's okay to not know an idea or any meaning behind the work, just make work and worry about that later. And I don't think that really resonated with me until years later. And then at SAIC, I had the really great experience of pushback, and being really challenged and questioned about why I was making the work I was making. And it forced me to question things I wasn't really thinking about before, and ways of handling paint I wasn't really considering before. And I had great teachers and grad advisors who never really told me to stop doing what I was doing, but were sort of supportive of me working figuratively, and it was a time that figurative painting was really not very popular, and just wanted me to think more about why and how I was doing it.
Early on, do you recall if there was an artist or a painting that really impacted you?
So in my parents' dining room, they have a print hung of Aristotle with the bust of Homer on one side, and then on the other side, the dining room, there's a print of Renoir's Boat Party. And I sort of feel like that embodies my two parents' personalities. And so I grew up looking at those all the time. And I think just being around them, I think, made me really excited about painting. And then when I got to college, I took a class on Manet, and I didn't really know anything about artists before I went to RISD. And that a class that I took on Manet really sort of got me thinking about painting and figuration and modernism and all of these things that, figurative painting could achieve that just transcends figuration as a subject. So I would say at a child level, and then as a college student, those two things were pretty important to me.
How would you define your practice?
All encompassing, everywhere, all the time. I'm never not thinking about painting, whether it's thinking about something that's in progress currently that I'm thinking about solving problems on, or, I'll see a color or an object and that'll maybe spark an interest for a future painting. Yeah, it's all the time, in and out of the studio. Sometimes it would be nice to just get through like an episode of something, of anything, without having to stop with because I have a flurry of painting thoughts that come in.
So let's talk about your process. What materials do you use? What's the process of choosing color? Share that with us.
All my paintings are oil on canvas, and color is a huge part of my work. It's one of the first decisions I make when making a painting. The way I think about color, it could either be a narrative association. I made an example that would be a painting that I made for the show I did with Marianne Boesky called Living Room. And those were colors specifically sourced from my mother's living room growing up. It was sort of a seafoam green, peach pink, very early 90s palette. Or it could be, I usually work 4 paintings at a time. So sometimes if I'm working paintings and it's like, wow, it feels really cool in here, I better get a cadmium yellow painting going. So sometimes it'll just be I'll select a color in response to what else is going on in my studio. And then I'll sort of, that'll be a challenge of making it work then with whatever image happens on the painting. And then sometimes color will start as a problem for a painting. The current show that I have coming up later this month with Josh Lilley is a lot about, a sort of forced relationship to the idea of home. And my husband and I moved into a new home about, 6-8 months ago, and inherited all of these sort of bad color and fixture choices that we had to live with for the first, stretch of being here. And there's a weird feeling sort of living in a space with things you wouldn't have chosen for yourself. And so I wanted to sort of mimic that feeling in the studio with these paintings. And so a lot of the paintings started with a ground color that I really didn't like, or that I really kind of wanted, something I wouldn't normally choose. And that was a way for me to sort of push back. And then in terms of process, when I start a painting, I'll usually start by mixing color. That's one of the first thing I'll do. I'll spend a couple hours just mixing color. And then sometimes I'll have an idea in my head, a narrative idea. and I'll just start painting. I don't really make preliminary drawings. So a lot of the paintings start just as a series of abstract shapes, me figuring out sort of how to organize the picture plane. I've always been self-conscious about composition. And so I kind of think about composition and shape relationship before I think about how the figure inserts itself within the composition. So in a lot of ways, that abstraction is how I begin work. And then it sort of progressively becomes more figurative in nature as it goes on.
And have you ever leaned more heavily towards figurative versus abstraction?
In terms of how I started painting?
Well, your practice in general, like early on.
Oh, earlier on, sure. Yeah. And that's a huge way that my practice has shifted. I think not just that the work was more figurative. I mean, in college, I mostly took observational figure painting, drawing, and portrait classes, which is really what I pull from more now than anything, because everything is intuitive now. How I used to work, like in, late undergrad through grad school, was everything was really sourced and pretty stiff and very idea based. And I would sort of just execute and plow through. And now it's much more of a back and forth dialogue, since it's so intuitive. And I'm doing a lot more listening as a painter than I used to. And I'd say that there's sort of a shift back and forth between days where it's just active painting and decision making, and days where just monotonous repetition, like 8 hours of painting plaid.
So when do you know when a work is finished, and when do you decide on the title?
Both are great questions. So for me, when a work is finished, usually means maybe I've put one more thing in that doesn't need to be there, or I've said the same thing twice. I try to avoid doing in painting. With being a narrative painter, you only want to know so much about what's going on in your work. You don't want to have all the answers to your work. And I find that the more I work a painting, the more I learn about what's going on, or the more you run the risk of learning what's going on. And so I think it's about pulling back right before you get to that point. And titling, I usually have, pet names or, working titles for paintings while I'm working on them. But then actual titling comes once the painting is done, because at any point the painting can take a turn. The painting can be 90% of the way done and it can totally change direction. So when the painting is done, my titles are usually really simple. The compositions are pretty complex, so I like to keep the titling simple.
Do you listen to music while you're working?
Yeah, I do. It's very in and out, because if I'm really focused in a painting, I could listen to music all day and not be able to tell you what I listen to. I think it's the days that I'm doing the monotonous plaid painting that I am able to actually listen more. And I listen to everything. I think, for the amount of hours I'm in the studio, I think my genres I'm pretty open in terms of genres of music, and I think I would have to be, or else I'd get pretty bored in there.
And what does your workspace look and feel like?
It's a mess, of course, but it's pretty organized. I'm a pretty organized person. I don't care what a disaster of a day I've had in there. I never leave. It's like you never go to bed angry. It's like you never leave studio without cleaning your brushes and palette. That way, at least if I've had a rough day in there, when I come back the next day, it's like I've hit the reset button. So it's a mess, but it's a mess I know how to navigate.
So if you weren't a visual artist, what other career path do you think you would have chosen?
I think it would definitely be visual artist adjacent. I think I always wanted to be a costume designer when I was young. That sort of attention to detail and research are so appealing to me. When I was a kid, Colleen Atwood, or junior high, she was like I idolized her. So I think that might be something that I would have went down. I think it still would have been in the visual arts field.
How do you keep learning?
It's a great question. By continuing to look at art in person as much as possible. Instagram is great for learning new names, and that could spike an interest. Oh, who's this? I'm not familiar with their work, or, by reading an article, or for that reason, it's great. But actually seeing work in person is a very different kind of learning experience. It's a way to really learn about artists whose work resonates with me, but it's also a way of learning and thinking about, surface and form and color, all those things that don't come through in digital media.
When you're creating, do you think about who your audience is?
No.
Does it matter if they do or don't understand your work?
No, I don't think that doesn't matter to me. I mean, I make autobiographical paintings about unmet expectations and doubt and shame, and, maybe hoping that some of that might resonate with whoever's looking at the work. But I think for me, it's really more about having people stand in front of the paintings and just have the experience of looking at the work.
What would you say are the most substantial challenges that you've encountered as an artist?
Well, on a micro level, I mean, painting is just really hard. On a more macro level, I think for me, most recently, it's just been life balance. I mean, it's just making painting work with everything else in life can be really challenging. I mean, when painting is going really well, it's all encompassing because my head is there with the paintings. And when the paintings aren't going well, it's all consuming because I'm just constantly trying to figure out, sort of where to go. And so that can be really challenging. I have an extremely understanding and supportive husband that sort of gets it and knows what it's like at this point to be married to me. But, it could be really challenging. I wish there were times I could just have an off switch that I could hit.
What are you excited about right now?
I mentioned, I think, the show coming up later this month, opening March 23rd with Josh Lilley in London. It's called House Sounds. I'm super excited to share that work. But, this thing happens where when you're finishing up work for one thing, you sort of start mentally cheating on that work with new ideas. So whatever's actually going, so I've started some new paintings since that work has been shipped off. And I think whatever's actually in progress in the studio at the moment is always the most exciting.
What do you enjoy most about your practice?
That it really gives me everything. It's unbelievably fulfilling. It gives me frustration, of course, but it also is extremely gratifying. It makes me laugh. I get everything I can from it, beyond actual human interaction, which is why it's also important for me to, make sure I spend a significant amount of time with other people, my husband, my friends, and family outside the studio.
Are there concepts or thoughts that connect your work?
Sure. I think a lot of my paintings are of mostly female figures who are sort of struggling with trying too hard and staving off boredom and self-doubt and irrelevance. And I think in a way that those are all things that I think about with painting, things that and I think in that way it makes the paintings as much about painting as they are about the narratives that are sort of being depicted. There's a real sort of vulnerability and exposure when you show paintings, when you make paintings and show them to people. And I think that some of that is mirrored in the way that I construct compositions.
I've enjoyed this conversation very much as our last question. And that is, what do you feel is the purpose of art? And as an artist, what is your role?
I think in a lot of ways, what art does is it hopefully allows people to just have the experience of looking at something without trying to make sense of it or solve it. I think at least I'm always trying to, make sense of what's going on around me or solve problems. And I think, having something that we just sort of experience looking is so important. And seeing how other people sort of identify with and express ideas about beauty and struggle and color and form. I think it's important to be challenged and stimulated, whether you like something or not. And then, maybe think about what it was about that thing that you liked or didn't like. Whenever I talk to someone, a friend or a family member who's not art affiliated, and they're like, I don't know if I don't like that work. It's always like, okay, well, why? What is it about that work that you don't like? And so I think it's really important for anyone to look at things differently than they normally would. And I think art can help contribute to that. And I think my role, I think just continuing to hunker down in the studio, keep challenging and surprising myself and to keep painting, but also to be aware of what's going on in the world around me. I think that's really important for artists.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed our talk.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, for inviting me. This was really great.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.